Hey friends, Brian Phipps here. On behalf of these awesome friends that I can't wait for you to meet, we are glad that you are here with us today. One of the big words in disciple-making circles today that has been growing and thankfully growing over the last several years is the word intentionality. Intentionality in disciple-making circles. Small group leaders, pastors, disciple makers of all kinds are becoming more intentional about a couple of things. One, what's the definition of a disciple? Two, what should happen in disciple making environments to help those disciples be realized? And today we're going to address a way to be intentional, but on a more systematic level in your church, your business, or your network. We're going to be talking about two topics that a lot of us tend to get confused. We're going to be talking about a big word, assimilation pathways and disciple making pathways. We're going to see that they are not at all the same, but if properly understood and used intentionally, can be a very powerful source of spiritual growth and momentum in your setting. So to prepare some space in your mind for this conversation, I invite you to envision what for me was a very scary set of imagery in my childhood. It's the end of the movie, The Wizard of Oz. They're in the great hall. You got Dorothy, you got the Tin Man and the Lion, and they're up front. And there's all this havoc and noise and fear-inspired stuff going on. And then, is it Frodo or Toto? What's the name of the dog? Toto. Is that right?
Toto.
Frodo's that other movie with the long trail. Yeah, the long pathway. So Toto goes over there and there's this little man behind the curtain who's doing all that he can, behind the scenes to make all this crazy stuff happen. Now, eliminate the intentional effort to provoke fear and intimidation and see the little person behind the curtain of your church or your context doing all they can to provide here we go, yellow brick road, a very simple, obvious, and compelling pathway to a much better solution of people growing and thriving in their God-given character and calling. That's our topic today. I hope it blesses you and your ministry. In the studio are about 1,000 people. These are several of our amazing coaches. We're missing Craig today, but we're starting to load this thing up. We've got a lot of folks here. It's so much fun. We asked if people wanted to take a month off. Everybody's like, nope, I'm in. So I'm excited. So what I'll do is just introduce one of them or introduce them one by one. Please just quickly share your role, where you're at, and what you do, and then we'll keep going. Myra, let's start with you.
All right. I am in my context, Christ Lutheran Church in Overland Park. I am a volunteer leader of our disciple making movements. And in the Fully Alive online community, I am the women's multiplication catalyst.
Excellent. And what does that mean quickly to be a multiplication catalyst?
Well,
you don't know. So I hope you don't ask me that.
I thought about this before we got on here. What it means to me right now is looking for ways that I can support other women in the online community with their multiplication efforts. So how can I help them to network? How can I help them build confidence? How can I help them better understand the community and the tools that we offer?
That's great. A catalyst in my mind is the chemistry. I think chemistry or physics. I'm not a science person.
Chemistry.
But it's that thing, the chemistry. It's that thing that affects everything else. And it can't help it. It's just by its nature catalytic to make things happen. And you are that person for the ladies in our organization. I love it. Tiffany, how about you?
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, so right now, what you can't see around my computer is all of the boxes that are currently packed in my house. My family is in an exciting time of transition as my husband and I are about to move to Central Florida to serve a new congregation there as their director of disciple making. And then my husband will be teaching as the theology teacher in their middle school and high school. So that's personal context, but my involvement with Disciples Made first came when I was introduced on the congregational side of things as I worked with Brian and Myra to apply the Disciples Made experiences within our congregation at Christ Lutheran. And now I get to be on the organizational side of things newly as a coach, and I'm still kind of in training and learning, but excited about this new chapter with Disciples Made and learning from Jason and Brian and Myra. So
love it. Yeah. Jason, let's turn it to you. What's your role? Where are you at? What do you do?
Yeah, so I am down here in the hot mugginess of the Gulf Coast of Texas in Houston, southeast area. I'm in a co-vocational season, and so I am part-time staff at Gloria Day, Houston as a discipleship director, and then part-time staff and on the leadership team with Disciples Made, doing everything and anything officially as a coach, communications, marketing, all the things, and often the guy who Brian calls on when he needs something made pretty. So that's
pretty.
me. Yes, that's my
I
job.
make ugly things. Jason makes them pretty.
Yeah,
And
you said
Jason
it.
is so much more than that. He is an extraordinary individual, extraordinary talent. So grateful that you're on the team.
Thanks,
I'm Brian Phipps, the founder of Disciples Made. And I love being able to be on this team of this growing family of disciple makers. It's a thrill for me. We've got a special guest. His name is Joe. I was on a team with Joe way back. Joe, you were a volunteer with the kids ministry at the church where I was on staff as a pastor when we met. Can you tell the quick story of what happened as you were a part of the assimilation discipleship pathway at Westside and what you're doing now?
Yeah. So like you said, I was a volunteer in kids ministry. They gave me a microphone every week and let me make kids get really loud. It was awesome. And then I joined up with a group of yours that you were leading in a backyard and around a fire. And through that, I remember you coming to me one day and we were sitting at a coffee shop and you said, "Hey, would you want to come make some phone calls?" Basically was the ask. Do you want to talk to people and work at the church? And my immediate response was, yes, I do want to make some phone calls and talk to people, and just slowly began to progress on staff in the Next Steps team with you. Took on First Impressions for a very short period of time till somebody else was hired. Then I took on the assimilation process and men's ministry and a few other things. And I think if you put everything that I had that was my responsibility on a business card, I would need front and back. And then 6 years ago, I got a phone call from a church plant from Westside up in Leavenworth, Kansas. And they called and asked me if I would consider becoming, at that point in time, just their care pastor. And because it's part of my giftedness. It's part of who I am. I like to meet people in the middle of their mess. But then I became the discipleship director, the discipleship pastor, and their assimilation guy because I had experience in that. And so I watched the assimilation pathway grow here while I was working on a team with you and some very talented people who made us look very good. And now I've been able to start to apply some of that in my current context where I am the discipleship and care pastor at Westside Family Church in Leavenworth, Kansas.
Love it. I love it. Thank you for that quick recap. Joe was in the very first Disciples Made cohort long time ago, 2011, January of 2011. And it was through that disciple making relationship that I saw a man called for ministry and invited you in part-time. That was a lot of fun. Smile and dial is what we used to do with Joe. Smile and dial.
14 years, man.
It's crazy.
I know.
It's crazy, crazy, crazy.
We were a lot younger then.
I was a lot younger.
We were.
I didn't have any more hair, but I was younger. That's for sure. Well, as you can see, discipleship. So there's a lot of wisdom on this call around this topic of assimilation and disciple making, how they work together. But before tapping into their wisdom, I want to let everybody know about a really exciting thing happening with Disciples Made. We're planning for our most exciting fall ever in all these 14 years that this has become a thing. These amazing coaches are ready to host 6 multiplication cohorts this fall. We have a 9-month process where you come once a month. We train you on the front end. We help you figure out what is it that you want to do as far as disciple making in your culture. And we come alongside and help bring some crystallized ways to accomplish those dreams. And these cohorts are huge support. Made up of about 2 to 5 disciple makers from up to 5 churches each that meet monthly, like I said, for honing best practices. We help troubleshoot discipleship roadblocks, provide you the support, the encouragement, and the accountability, all, as Myra said earlier, for disciple catalyzation there in your setting. It's how these leaders were successful in their own settings. They were a part of a cohort at one point or another. One of those cohorts of the 6 is already filled. The second already has 2 churches signed up. Jason, how will people learn more about this opportunity and start a registration process?
Yeah, absolutely. The best way is to go to disciplesmade.com, and then you'll see up at the top navigation, there's a tab that says coaching, and so that will get you there, and you'll learn about our proven process and the multiplication cohorts. And also too is maybe you want to pick up a discovery call, and so feel free to click the link on there as well, and that'll connect you with me.
Excellent. So disciplesmade.com. I wanted y'all to know this because I can't stand listening to a podcast and then not having a direct way to follow up on the things that excited me in it. And these cohorts help you develop these things in your setting to create this synergy between assimilation and disciple making. So if you like what you hear today, be sure to check that out. Okay, let's get started. And let's start wisely with what the scriptures say about these topics. Is it important for people to be assimilated? And that's not like, okay, I'm going to date myself, the Borg with Star Trek. And I know that Jason is probably thinking, I can't believe he even did that.
No, I've seen Star Trek.
Yeah, okay.
I can't speak Klingon, but I'm familiar.
If I'd have done that, y'all would have fired me. So not doing that. Does the Bible even talk about assimilation? Is it important? Are there pathways? Is that important? So Jason, does the Bible actually encourage us to be intentional and to think strategically about pathways like this?
Absolutely. One of the things that when I took my role here at Gloria Day, as well as just the passion that burns within me, the things that I can't help but do when I look at the ministry in the church, ministry with Disciples Made, is that this whole idea of moving people from consumers to contributors. And it's just something I can't shake. And so for those that I'm discipling, those that are on staff with me, I just keep coming back to like Ephesians 4, which starts off with the APEST. So Christ gave himself to the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and the teachers to what? To equip his people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up. And I just think that that's one of the key verses that I hinge on, because I think it's one of the things that that plagues most churches, is that, you kind of have churches with cultures that operate just like a provider of religious goods and services, and that we have members, and members have expectations, and members are always right, and all these kind of things. And I think, those are things that we have to manage. And when I came in to my context here, and then even just my history of, making disciples intentionally over the last 10 to 15 years, is that God designed us for more. And for me being, of the specific Lutheran tribe that I'm part of, we always talk about this thing called the priesthood of all believers. And so I think that just keeping this text in front of us helps us to remember that, for those of us that are on church staffs, regardless of our capacity, is how are we equipping saints, the followers of Jesus, the ordinary folks that are worshiping with us, serving, volunteering, all those kind of things, connected in small groups. How are we equipping them in their gifts, their passion, their story, to actually move from consumers to contributors, to partners, to co-laborers? And so I'm excited for this conversation today to help us recognize that, like, we can do it. That's what Disciples Made does, is that we specialize in helping you kind of fill the gap between assimilation and disciple making, because it can be done. It's happening here in my context. I know it's happening in all of our contexts here on the call. But so Ephesians chapter 4, equipping the people for works of service, equipping the saints, I think is just a verse that I keep in the forefront of my mind.
Great. So I'm just going to offer a quick follow-up thought. A major thought was provoked in my mind as you were describing this. I've heard an awful lot of very hyper compelling and clear definitions of preferred outcomes. Like, I want to help people move from being a consumer to a contributor. That's awesome. And that can be like on your shelf or on a poster on the church's wall, or even great big on the slide on Sunday mornings or whatever. But if it isn't actually happening, that's a pathway problem. The steps to get there aren't clear, and the steps along the way either aren't clear or aren't effective, or something's broken with the pathway. And so again, I mean, if our goal is to equip the saints, that's not an optional outcome, right? That's required. And if it's not working to where we can take this thing where the whole church is equipped, then that's a pathway problem. So this is a critical conversation. Joe, how about this? I had a front row seat in watching a pathway bring life to your personal calling. We just talked a little bit about that. Any verses stick out to you as far as what they say about this whole idea of path?
Yeah, as we were thinking about this, and I was listening to what Jason was saying, man, there's some stuff that resonated with me within my own personal story. I had been assimilated into Westside Family Church. I mean, I was a part. I was serving. I was in a small group. My wife and I, we were members of the church. We were doing all the things, but there was this disconnect between my thoughts of myself as being able to be as just being a person in a pew, and being able to be someone who could have influence. And I remember the first time I really, I started to realize that the Apostle Peter spoke my language, and he spoke a language that spoke directly to me. And so when he's talking in 1 Peter chapter 2, it says, "But you were a chosen people." This was I would read that multiple times, and I couldn't, I get stuck there. God really chose me. I knew me. I tell people all the time, I am the foremost expert in how screwed up I am. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession. That you may declare the praises of him who called you out of the darkness and into his wonderful light. And there was this thing that began to happen when assimilation became not checkboxes, but became responsibilities. And it became my responsibility to follow and respond to the call of Jesus, and to do everything in my power to live a life that's worthy of those words. And it shifted the way that I saw things at home, the way that I saw things at my work, shifted my entire life. And so, Jason, when you were talking about, I think we have a lot of people who are we're talking about assimilation, who are assimilated, but are just consumers because we've misdefined assimilated. Because we've misdefined what that means. It doesn't mean just being part of the body. It means being an active participant in the furthering of the kingdom of God and living up to those words in 1 Peter. But yeah, I remember the day that those words became things that I could say proudly instead of with my head down.
I can't help but to make another comment here.
Go ahead,
So Jason's language was consumer to contributor. You were contributing, but there was still a gap between where you were and what you became. And I think, Jason, you gave collaborator, and then I can't remember what the rest of your words were.
Me neither.
But it's real important. Assimilation, most assimilation pathways have a contributor element to them.
Absolutely.
We'll probably talk about that. So, but Joe, thank you. That story really helps us realize that even though I've gotten to the point where I might even be serving, I'm contributing, I might not be at the finish line or the end zone or what we would call the, what is it called? The sweet spot of your personal calling.
Absolutely. 100%.
Optimizing the gifts and passions God's given me. Jason, you look like you have to say something here.
Yeah. No, thanks for picking up on that. Cause I think I've used that kind of term, moving from consumer to contributor, for so long and so often that I think I got to change it. I'm compelled to change it now, because if we're all about moving the finish line from serving to actual multiplication, is that there's got to be a better way to word that. So thank you for that. That was good.
Oh, you bet.
I got to repent.
And I'm ready to hand the microphone over to Myra, because Myra always brings the truth bombs, and we're already starting with some pretty good bombs here. So Myra, what other scriptures come to mind that motivate you to be intentional about pathway?
So, there's so much that's been said here already that's so valuable and so important. But I think if I think about the contributing, what am I contributing to? What's the ultimate mission or commission, which takes me to the scripture of, Jesus said, "Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them and training them to obey everything that I've commanded you. Lo, I'm with you always to the end of the age." That is the ultimate. If we're contributing to, if we're contributing to that mission, that's going to look different and feel different. That's, I think, when Joe realized that he was part of that, maybe was that moment that really awoke in him that sense of, I really am chosen. I really am part of that royal priesthood. I really am all of those things. And I think that making disciples is that thing that fulfills that more that we all want and don't even know and can't even define until we get there. And then when you experience that, it's like, this is what I was made for. And it looks different for every single person in a little, different ways. It looks different in every congregation, but it should engage every person in being a part of that. That's part of the obedience to what Jesus, the commands that he gave us. Go and make disciples. That applies to everybody. And we can't be fully obedient to him. We can't experience the full joy of our relationship with him until we're doing that. So that just compels me to say, this pathway is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
the other,
what I heard you say, Myra, is everybody in the world needs a Joe moment. And right now,
yes.
we don't even have everybody on our street, much less our neighborhood, much less our community, much less our church,
Mm-hmm.
much less, our business
Right.
or whatnot. And that's a pathway problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not clear.
Right.
I keep going back to that the Wizard of Oz in my head. I just see, you know how you can see the Emerald City way out there,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just obvious where the golden, the yellow brick road is. It's like, how do we create something so simple, obvious, and strategic as that? That's aiming toward a preferred place. I love that. So somebody was starting to talk. Was that you, Myra, still going or?
Yeah, I had another thing. I was listening to a podcast a while back and heard J.D. Greer talking about this passage. And the point that he made was that the active verb here is make disciples or just disciple, and that all the other verbs in this passage support that. Go, make disciples, baptize disciples, teach them to observe everything I've commanded you. That's discipling. That's the pathway. And that we as disciple makers get to follow.
Absolutely. And they, by the way, J.D. Greer's church has phenomenal pathways for spiritual formation, leadership development, church planting. I love that. All right, Tiffany, let's get to you. Certainly there's at least one more verse that compels us to be intentional about this. What are you seeing?
I think back to when you and Myra first introduced Disciples Made to me. And one of the things that you really impressed upon me was the difference between addition and multiplication. I think that an important part of assimilation is that, me as the director of disciple making, being able to recognize people like Joe who have been shaped for influence and helping them find those steps to get there. But then to also have that DNA impressed upon other people that we're influencing so that we can grow leaders. So we're not just adding disciples, but we're multiplying by adding people who know how to make other disciples. And so it reminds me of a verse in 2 Timothy, beginning of chapter 2, where it talks about the truths that we teach. And we have to pass those truths on to those that are reliable and trustworthy and that understand what the DNA of a fully alive disciple looks like. And that can then, just like that metaphor you're using with the Wizard of Oz, others that can link arm in arm and skip down the yellow brick road together with people and take people along with them that understand how to get there and what the steps are and help other people realize their areas of influence as well.
Is anybody overwhelmed with more than 10 generations of disciple multiplication in your setting on this call?
No.
Nope, not yet.
That's a pathway problem.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to keep coming back to it. It's like all of these verses delineate the goal that we've now had over 2,000 years to help accomplish to get to the ends of the earth. If it's happened before, it can happen again. If it's happened before, and it can happen again, I think pathways are a big part of it. So I get the sense that being as wise as we can about understanding and assimilation and disciple making pathways and how they can work together is close to the heart of God. So the next step is to bring some clear definition to these things. Jason, let's go back to you. What is assimilation? Let's just use the church as a setting. Businesses, networks, anybody else can can take this template and apply it where they're going? What is that process? What is it?
Yeah, I think it's most simply stated that we're moving people that from first-time attenders to becoming connected, to becoming known, and then contributing in some way. And so it's just that, so we talk the next steps process or first impressions, this kind of thing, is that it's all the steps to get people known, connected. And then I think I'll just end with that. Just getting them connected, building new relationships, helping them feel like they perhaps found their home.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. A big focus on welcome, connection, and then like being integrated. One of the most popular ones that I've heard in assimilation, just the words that people use is come, grow, go, right? Or worship, connect, serve. And every one of them has kind of starts with a low level of engagement and moves to a more moderate level of engagement, then a serving contributor capacity. And once they're there, they're connected relationally and they're stuck. They've been assimilated, which we already know, according to Joe's story, was not exactly everything. It was good.
It was good,
but it did not get to the end zone. So Joe, you and I built the assimilation process at Westside. I think like you said, you were first steps. Amy was first impressions, making people feel welcome. First steps, you were making sure they got connected and got a next step. What's your current assimilation pathway now that you've kind of changed campus, the same church, different campus? What is that pathway and how is it helping people connect deeply to the ministry there?
So the way we've been looking at things and some of our language has recently changed. We have shifted some things in the last year that we want people, what we've been talking with people about is connecting and growing. We want them to connect with Christ and grow with Christ. We want them to connect with their mission, grow in their mission. We want them to connect with the body of believers and grow with the body of believers. All three of those. And it really kind of got those out of order, but that's it's connect and grow. So one of the things that we have started to do is make sure that every month there are opportunities for people to connect in all three of those ways, to connect with Jesus, whether that be through Rooted or Alpha, connect with the body of believers. And so that's, we do basically just show up and get to know people events. So we brought back the potluck. It's great. People seem to like it. But even at the potluck event, it's strategic because we don't want it to just be a connect at that event. There's an on-ramp for someone to connect with Christ coming out of that at every single one of these things. So, but the grow element of it is, and this is something that we're just starting to look at and begin to roll out on a small scale. And we're going to try it on a small scale before doing it on a broad scale. Is Barna put out a little survey that's basically it's a church pulse, but it's also a person pulse, to where we can kind of have people will take this 5 to 7 minute assessment and kind of give us a snapshot and give them a snapshot of where they're at in their walk with Christ. There's no wrong answers to any of it, but it helps me be able to, or one of my coaches now, be able to follow up with somebody and help them connect at the level where folks need to be. And so to where they can grow the best. So we don't make too big of a jump. Because, Brian, we both, I think you and I have both had followers made or leaders made groups where we have had somebody who took maybe too big of a jump.
Yep.
They hopped in, it wasn't quite the right season. They were willing. And so we want to meet people where they're at in those areas. And what we've seen over the course of this last 6 months is, as far as next steps being taken, of the people that we can track who have shown up. We've seen about a 40% increase in participation in some of those grow areas by just making it so readily accessible.
Gotcha. So what I'm hearing from you is you're starting to build a path where wasn't quite clear yet.
Correct.
And you're measuring success. One of the principles that you and I ran off of was from a book called 7 Practices of Effective Ministry, which is think steps, not programs. And that's such a helpful phrase. I don't want people to just get plugged into programs. I want whatever programmatic elements we have to be a part of a grander pathway that help people move from just connecting to growing to going, whatever that mission is. So I love that. I love that. Thank
Brian,
you.
one of the things that I learned in that process, and anyone who knows me well would know that 7 Practices of Effective Ministry was not my favorite book the very first time that we read it.
True.
But I learned a lot from it. And one of the things that I gathered that wasn't explicitly written in the book, but I gathered just through my reading there, is that if it's not measurable, then if it's not measurable, then we what's the word? If it's not measurable, we shouldn't be doing it. So we need to figure out how to measure everything in one way or another.
Yep.
And so the measurement of next steps, the measurement of people taking specific steps has been, and moving along the pathway that's just becoming clear as time goes on, that we're starting to, some of it where I think we've accidentally on purpose fallen into and are starting to put language to after the fact.
Accidentally on purpose. Figure out what worked and name it.
That's right.
That's what I heard.
That's
And
exactly
that's not cheating. That's called smart.
That's
If you ask
yes.
me.
Yes.
All right. Tiffany or Myra, you were on the same team developing disciples at a church together for several years. What was the assimilation process at Christ Lutheran, and how well did it help people connect?
I'm going to start off on this because I was there before Tiffany and started with that. We were stuck very much in that programmatic, not step thing. I'm not sure we're still out of it, but that's really where we were. The term that comes to my mind is that the paths were really muddied. The assimilation and discipleship paths were mixed together and just muddy, and it was really hard for people to see what was what and which was which and where they should be going. When I was introduced about 10 years ago to you, Brian, and to Disciples Made, things started becoming clearer, and we started looking at that more intentionally and tried to unmuddy the waters. And that's about when Tiffany came on and when I went to a volunteer capacity. And I think that she did a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of clarifying the waters. So I'll let her
That's
go.
really
first.
gracious. That's incredibly gracious. But I think that in that process, Myra did a lot of mentoring, a young person that was willing, but maybe not necessarily yet, what we would say competent, obedient, not quite competent yet. But she did a great job of helping to mentor me through that as well as Brian did. And then I had others on my team that worked with me. But like Joe said, I think, defining next steps was really important. So we kind of came up with two initiatives. One was to help our members understand how to move from consumer to contributor, like Jason had mentioned, but then also then defining what those steps are and making them a lot more clear, a lot more relevant. And so we started with our new member classes in that assimilation process where we started taking all of our new members through a strengths assessment through Gallup, is known as the Clifton Strengths, so that they can understand what their natural strengths were. But then we also combined that with their spiritual gifts and then began to help plug them in and help them to start prayerfully considering what their first steps were going to be within the context of our congregation, but also within the context of their personal spaces as well, while simultaneously then, trying to define that for our congregation, lay out that yellow brick road. And so we started using Disciples Made language just to really make things cohesive. And we talked about environments where people could explore character and calling, where they could develop their character and calling, and then apply that character and calling in an area of influence, whether that was inside or outside the walls of the church. And so it became very important then for us to kind of just on a regular basis encourage our members to prayerfully consider, what is this next step that God is calling me to in this season? Is he calling me into a developed step? Maybe it's stepping into an opportunity with Disciples Made through Followers Made, Leaders Made, whatever that might be. Maybe it was an area of influence and stepping into serving one of our benevolence partners. The sky was really the limit, but we tried to be intentional about helping those people, helping all of our congregation members recognize that each one of them were called to a next step, whether that was eliminating something from their life, taking a step in faith and following the Holy Spirit into their next chapter of discipleship, whatever that might be. And so that was our goal, was just to make things a little bit clearer. As Myra said, I don't know that that process has fully arrived yet. It's still in development. Like Joe said, sometimes you try things and you find them on accident, but at the same time, like still trying to define those things a little bit clearer so that those steps aren't so, I don't know, difficult. Like Joe said, he said, someone said he was shaped for influence, but he had no idea how to get there. And so just kind of giving those opportunities along the way.
I love it. I love it. So a couple of things to point out here. One, assimilation is critical. We've kind of, it seems to me we've landed there. And if assimilation is getting people connected to your church, which is fundamental, like those relationship connections are fundamental for developing potential disciple making relationships. Another thing that came out, Tiffany, to me as you were talking was just because it's an assimilation pathway doesn't mean discipleship isn't happening to some degree. That's a really big point to make. The problem is it can happen without a bunch of disciple making happening. And to ensure that that isn't the case, we marry the two together. So if assimilation is connecting people to your church, discipleship is connecting people to Jesus through his spirit with particular outcomes. So let's turn that direction. Jason, we'll come back to you. What is disciple multiplication? How is that different than assimilation?
Yeah, I think the best way to answer it would be to say that like disciple multiplication is just the intentional process of equipping and empowering disciples to make more disciples who in turn do the same. It results in exponential growth rather than I think just the addition that occurs in assimilation.
So typical assimilation processes don't equip people to do that.
I don't think so.
Yeah. I was just obviously just trying to.
You were like, why is he asking me that?
I mean, that's a hefty lift, right?
Yeah,
that's a hefty lift. So when we start to unpack this part of the podcast, we're moving from what is somewhat simple in comparison to the heavy lifting. Like, do I get people to come to church? Not that that's super simple, but it's on the scale of things, it certainly is quite a bit easier to join a group. Okay, people need community to serve. Great. I mean, they're showing that much more initiative, but that's relatively simple than helping someone fundamentally orient their life around the mission of Jesus, to where they're owning that mission, which is the gap between what Joe talked about, right? I'm no longer a consumer, I'm a contributor, but there's still a gap between where I am and where I can go. So I love it, Joe. We developed the disciple multiplication pathway together.
We did.
At Westside. Actually, one was handed to us when we got there. It was seeker, believer. People, this is kind of the 4 phases of spiritual formation that we were handed when we got there. Seeker, people that are just coming to see if Jesus is real. Believer, people that believed in the mission of Jesus but weren't quite optimized yet. Followers and leaders. So if you're hearing the word followers and hearing followers made and leaders made, I created those things in order for people to take those steps in that system. It changed later to explore, develop, influence, like Tiffany just mentioned. But what's that process for you now, and how well is it multiplying disciples in your context?
As we were thinking, as I was thinking about this, I started to, sometimes I have a tendency to compartmentalize my 2 roles and not think about them as a mutuality. I was thinking at the beginning when I came, I was like, I don't know that I'm going to have a lot to say about this right now. But then I started thinking about what has happened in our care ministry. Over the course of the last 4 years, when COVID hit, we had, and everything shut down, like everybody's masks came off and all the care needs for our congregation came to the surface. And so what we started looking at as far as pathway in care is that's where we needed to develop, and that's where we needed to send people, because there were so many hurting people that if I could spend my time developing and sending people in that area, then we were going to benefit the churches and the community and these families and the body of Christ. That's where we needed to be. And so some of the language that I started to use at that point in time was grow, show, and go. Show, grow, and go. Show up and let me, and I want to show you the problem. I want to present to you, this is the truth. This is the actuality of where we're at. And we're taking some of that now and turning it into all of our discipleship process. Let's show you what the reality of things is. But then we grow. But the grow takes commitment. And within our care ministry, I remember telling our care leaders something that you told me when we first got into that first group is, I'll invest in you as long as you're investing in someone else. And so it became part of what we did. So that's that growing bit, but it also incorporates the go without people even knowing it's happening. They think they're just growing, but really they're taking what they're learning and they're going and they're expending this to somebody else. And it allowed us to be able to develop, probably about 50 care leaders.
Wow.
Who in one way or another were caring for the emotional and spiritual and physical needs of our congregation during a season when it was needed the most. But they were doing it by investing in individuals or in groups. And now we're taking that. I'm taking that show, grow, and go, and starting to bring it into everything else. We're trying to bring that into everything else within the congregation. And so it's because what I've realized, especially in our culture, we have a lot of military folks who, now that they're retired from the military, they're uncomfortable with titles. So if I started calling them leaders or followers, they get uncomfortable with that now because they're like, hey, that part of that season of my life is behind me. But if I say, hey, I want you to come into this and we're going to grow, or hey, like it's time for you to go, like they get those things. So for us right now, our pathway looks a lot like I'm starting to gather people to say, hey, here's the lay of the land within discipleship in the kingdom of God right now. So we're showing here's the situation. And then I'm starting to make the invitations into, I want to hang out with you. I've got some other leaders. We want to hang out. But if you want me to invest in you, you've got to be doing this with somebody else. So I borrowed from you, man. I just took what you did to me and did it to somebody else.
So what you're telling me is that I showed you.
Yeah.
And then
I grew,
we kicked you out.
Then I went. Yeah.
What I love about that is you had a picture of what you wanted people to come. So you need an end zone of what it looks like at the end of the funnel. And you created multiple phases and you gave language to each of those phases and what it looks like. And you can paint that picture and you can walk people along that yellow brick road, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it results in 40 something people providing care, which is lighter for your shoulders and more meaningful for theirs.
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. That's big. All right. So Myra, you helped shape a pathway at your church. What's that process for you now? And how's it multiplying disciples in your context? And then we'll just turn it to Tiffany for the same question.
I want to go back to reflect on something that Joe was saying, and just the importance of contextualizing the language that you use. He had people who were uncomfortable or said, no, I'm done leading people. I'm not, the uniform's off. And so contextualizing the pathway where I'm at now, and we've had some big changes, but the pastor who I'm working with, who I've worked with for years, is a fly fisherman, and rivers resonate with him. And so our pathway is now a river, is the river of life. And so we are taking people, we're inviting them to stand on the bank and look out at the river and see what's there, and inviting them to dip their toes into the river and eventually to either jump in and swim or hop in the canoe and even become guides for that. And so just kind of re-envisioning the pathway of explore, develop, and influence, contextualizing the language with something that people are a little bit more comfortable with. And then this is something that Tiffany had started when she was on staff, was to really let's look at the ministries that are out there and where they fit in that explore, develop, influence. Ask the leaders of those ministries to see what they have in those different areas. And so I'm kind of picking up where she left off with that, getting ready to do that more probably in the fall of this year to add to that. But again, just contextualizing the language was something that I think is going to resonate with the people at my church. So yeah, that's kind of what it looks like right now.
I love it. So the river's there. You got viewers, you got toe dippers, you got swimmers and guides. It sounds like that's pretty fun. Oh, I love it. All right. So Tiffany, you're off to a new place.
Yeah.
You apparently get a voice into what's it's going to look like. So what are you dreaming of?
I'm so excited about it, to be honest. We went and visited this congregation, I don't know, a few weeks ago. And just in talking to both people from the congregation, but just within the community as well, I got lots of opportunity to do that. This congregation has a deep history of planting new churches, being deeply involved in the community and starting different outreach missions and nonprofits and just doing work outside the walls of the church. It seems though, God, I think God has different seasons for his churches, that they go through, where it's a season of rest or a season of go. And I think that the church right now is in that season of rest. They've been a little bit dormant in some of that activity as of recently. But what I find is this thread of hunger and hope within those that are part of that congregation, and they are ready to get back to work. And so it's just really exciting to see the possibilities that are there. I think through a recent assessment or survey that we did with the congregation, it would seem that the spiritual commitment is strong. And that's really encouraging for me. But then we get to go in and really offer opportunities for them to be more engaged, both within the congregation in relationship with one another, but then to re-engage with the community in their personal spaces and areas of influence as well. So really just, again, getting to provide those opportunities and experiences and environments where they can explore, develop, and lean into areas of influence where they've been shaped for.
So you're going to run the explore, develop, influence and try to do your best to work that into the culture there.
I mean, I certainly think that that's language that's applicable in those situations. I think that it's stuff they've done before and they're ready for it. So.
Got it. Sweet. Okay, let's start to bring this together. Jason, we believe in more than simply affirming the pathway idea. Like, I think it was Andy Stanley wrote a book recently, or at least in the last 10 years, The Principle of the Path, where he talks about the goal is direction, not the destination. If you're on the right direction, you'll get to the preferred destination. If you're not, then you can define whatever destination you want. If you don't ever get there, you still have a pathway problem. So we're affirming the pathway thing. We're affirming that assimilation is a great pathway to get people connected to the body of the church. We're agreeing that a disciple-making pathway is great to get people connected to Jesus, to optimize his influence in and through and beyond their life. Now, let's talk about leveraging assimilation to fuel disciple multiplication. How does that work?
I think I've heard you say quite a bit when we talk about assimilation and discipleship is just asking the question, which one is serving which one, and that we want to make sure that the more that we're getting people connected, assimilated, contributing and serving, is that those are all pointed to and serving towards disciple making and multiplication, helping people step into their masterpiece mission. And so when we talk about leveraging, is that how can we actually use the connection events, the relationships that are built in the worshiping community, and specifically, I think, taking those that are already actively engaged in serving, because they are contributing. They do take ownership in a program or two or whatever it may be, because they're already showing initiative. And so then when it comes to the intentional development of character and calling to help people partner with Jesus, to help people to grow as not just disciples, but disciple makers, and then even helping them, kind of take the lid off their vision to becoming like, God is using me to create multiple generations of a spiritual family. And that's beyond what more people can even, perhaps not more people, but just most people haven't even thought about that. And so when we talk about leveraging, I think it's taking those who are already showing an initiative, that are already engaged, and saying, hey, we're moving the finish line, because when we look at the life of Jesus, like, we want to help you become a co-laborer, a partner and stuff. And so I think that's like the best way to leverage it is that if we have, a 10 Connect serve is taking those people at the finish line. I don't know what to call it. I don't want to say the false finish line, the premature finish line. Thank you. Of serving and saying, hey, let's take this to the next step and help you become a leader.
I think it's fair to call it the end of the assimilation funnel. Yeah. So just quick numbers. Let's say if you've got a church with 100 adults, I'm assuming that a really good, healthy church is going to have 60 of those in small groups, 60 of 100. That's 6 out of 10. That's a great percentage. And that same church is probably going to have, for every 100 people, they're going to have 30 serving. So 100, 60, 30. Which ones are demonstrating the most initiative? It's the 30. So Jason, what you're saying is look at those 30 and then maybe the 60 in groups. They're probably the same. The 30 is probably the same. Look to those people to invest in, to move from the developing their spiritual formation to turn them into spiritual influencers. And I think that wisdom right there is just so key. Joe, how have you seen this play out in your setting, both now and in the past?
Yeah. So one of the things, Jason, as you were talking about like that false finish line, it made me think. I don't know if any of you all have ever climbed the Manitou Incline in Colorado. It's about, you gain almost a mile and a half in elevation, and about not quite a mile. Sorry, you gain 2,222 feet in about a mile and a half. So you're going up.
It's fast.
But there's a spot about 3/4 of the way up where you can step off and you think you're at an apex. And if you're not paying attention, you thought you've hit the top, but you haven't made it there. And you still have about 600 steps left. And so I was thinking about that when you were saying that. But, this is a hard nut to crack because, especially when you work for a local church, what looks good and what is good are sometimes the same, but aren't always the same. What looks good is backsides and seats. And so assimilation shows really well. My military guys would tell you it briefs well. It's the numbers you want to put out there because it's the numbers that you can gain quickly. But leveraging that to be able to see the actual fruit. So I think that for me, the biggest shift has been moving from measuring backsides and seats to measuring actual fruit, and then making everything we do an invitation into something that produces actual fruit. There is one of the things my co-pastor Casey and I, we talk about, that it's an easy no if someone presents something that doesn't have a strategic and obvious next step into an environment where someone's going to grow with their walk with Jesus. It's an easy no. And so it's caused the other people on our staff, it's caused some of our ministry leaders to have to start to think differently. And so that we don't get those false finish lines of, oh, well, people showed up. Well, I can throw a pretty good party and I'm a pretty good inviter and I can get a lot of people to something. But if that's the measure of my success, then I haven't made disciples. I've just filled seats.
Don't miss the grander view is the challenge I hear you say.
Yeah. Finish your climb up the mountain.
Yeah.
It's pretty from on top.
That's awesome. So we've talked an awful lot about like strategy, high level strategy, pathways and stuff like that. But Tiffany, this process, this climbing that second half of the mountain does a whole lot more than mobilize and turbocharge volunteers. Let's put some flesh on this. You can also make some lifelong friends with this process, can't you?
That's for sure. That's for sure. I think this is where Disciples Made became the most personal for me. In 2021, Myra had invited me and some other people into a Leaders Made experience, the first one in our congregation. And in that experience, we talk about a lot of things, obviously, but there were two people that we would identify in that process. One would be what we call our Timothy, and one that we called our Roscoe. Timothy is that, that person that has a relationship with Jesus, is ready for influence, and is being mentored by you in that process. The other person, your Roscoe, is someone that you are actively planting seeds and praying that the Holy Spirit will grow in them a beautiful faith. And so that person is my best friend, Chelsea, who is also here now on staff with Disciples Made. She preceded me, in fact, and we began a relationship back in 2020 when she started watching my son in her in-home daycare. And through the process, I got this prompting from God that Chelsea needed to be baptized. And I mean, obviously everybody does, but there was something specific about Chelsea. And so I quickly identified her as my Roscoe. And through, leaders like Myra and people in my triad who had intentional conversations and were also praying alongside of me, began also, this journey with Chelsea. And so it started with conversations and relationships and hanging out, and eventually an invitation to join us at church. I think she told me at one time that I was a little too persistent, maybe in some aspect. I was really excited, but
You and Myra get along because what?
yeah, pretty much. But I didn't give up. And eventually, what ended up happening is her daughter enrolled at the preschool at the church. And so her and my son attended preschool together. And there's lots of beautiful parts of the story that involve her daughter as well in that discipleship process. But eventually, in the spring of 2022, only Chelsea, but her entire family, her husband and her 2 children were all brought to the waters of holy baptism. And we celebrated that day. And, it's humbling that God would allow me to have a front row seat to something like that, especially in my best friend's life. So, I can remember the tool that we used. It was called blesseveryhome.com. It is now part of the Missionaries Made experience, but I can look back on the notes that I made of, invited them to church, got them a story Bible, all the different things. And then my favorite date, though, is when it says became a child of God through the waters of holy baptism.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
I love it. All right, Myra, we're past time, but we cannot not wrap this up without Myra, who's listened to all this, who I know is as intentional as they get. So, Myra, what do you need to add to this conversation?
It just came to mind as I was listening to this, what happens when Joe talked about the Manitou incline, and you get to that point and you think you're at the top. Back when I was in charge of small groups, there was the most active, the most connected small group in our church. And it was an amazing group. And I had watched them grow, and I kept encouraging them to expand, to reach out, to multiply. And they were just resistant because they had it so good where they were. And within a period of months, a little over a year probably, the group imploded. And God called them all different places of growth and service and discipleship. It ended up being a beautiful thing, but it was the most painful thing for them to have experienced at the time. And so I think it's so important for us as disciple makers, disciple multipliers, to just keep encouraging people, helping them to see that there is that more, there is that joy set before them in the same way it was set before Jesus, that tells you, keep moving. Don't stop until you get to the top.
That's good. Change the metaphor, add this metaphor to it. Familiar with the Dead Sea, one of the lowest places on earth. Jordan River runs into it, but it doesn't run out. And all it does is just get sick. And assimilation, what we're saying here is that left alone, it gets people to a natural stop. We've called it a lot of things, false finish line, all the other things. It's just not the right stop. The flowing river, to go to Myra's illustration, is when the same people pour back out into others. They continue to grow. Other people continue to benefit. It's a beautiful thing. So let's let this be the invitation that we wrap up with. We want to invite every leader to stop viewing assimilation as discipleship. Stop viewing assimilation as discipleship, and start leveraging assimilation to fuel discipleship. We're not people that put down assimilation processes. We want your church to get bigger.
That's right.
In fact, we'll do everything we can to help that happen. We want your assimilation processes to be awesome. But if they're assimilation or anything more than fueling discipleship, then you got to ask yourself, what are you really in the business of? So we need to sign off with that. Anybody have a burning thing before we turn off?
I just want to tell you guys thank you for letting me come and hang out today. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
It's awesome to have you, man. It's awesome. All right. If not, then just friends, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to learn more about the cohort opportunities that we're providing this fall. Again, disciplesmade.com/coaching, or the tab up there, coaching, you'll find that. Just imagine you and 3 or 4 key leaders in your context joining you and 4 other churches to leverage assimilation to fuel disciple multiplication. It's a shift that'll change your context forever. Hope you'll join us. Thanks for being on the call. We'll talk soon.